And one of the other issues that this truck has is the bump stops. The cushion actually is completely gone. So there's just the metal bracket for mounting there. There's nothing to cushion from the bump stop to the top of the leaf spring pad. So one thing I did is I got some Daystar bushings, the KU09016 BK, and that's the 4.5 tall, 4.5 inch long, 2.5 inch wide. It's going to be this big bump stop right here. So the mounting holes in the top actually don't line up with the same spacing as this one, but also I'll need to have it down a little bit lower, so I'll have to make a bracket that'll hold it off the frame a little bit. So I need to do some measurements and get those fabricated up, and then I'll have some of these bump stops to help with that suspension compression and bottoming out. So one more step to working on that front end. Here is that regular bump stop mount that went up here. So what I'm going to need to do is I'll need to take this mount and fabricate a spacer from this, which will go then to the top of this and stand off, and then I'll be able to have a plate on the bottom that'll mount to these bolts on the bump stop and then tie into the original mount up there. So I've got my measurement from the frame to the bump stop is 10.25. I just need to figure out what suspension travel I want, where I want it to actually stop at, taking into consideration some of the gaps here, the compression of this bump stop with those holes, and that'll tell me what my standoff bracket size will need to be. So I'll work on that. Here I've got what I've drawn up for my bump stops. I've got my new bump stop, the original bump stop mounting bracket. I've got the drawings of each of those. I know what with the voids my compression is, so it's just about 3 inches when that bump stop is completely compressed. And again, not taking into account any of the compression of the polyurethane in itself, it's just the voids. But I figured I want about, from measuring on the truck, about 4 inches of compression before I stop. So with that compression, it gives me, you can see it's going to compress some. That's going to give me an overall bracket height that I need of just over 2 3/4. So top plate and the bottom plate for the bracket are going to be 3/16 material, and then I'll build in that center section at 2 3/4, and that will give me the standoff that I need. So next up, we'll be able to get the measurements for the frame plate, or the frame plate up here, and the bump stop plate here. Get the holes drilled in it, get that spacer built, and so I'll be able to get those fabricated and mounted up on the truck. I've got my pieces cut out and drilled. I've got my top frame to bracket mount. I've got my 2 3/4 inch spacer, and I've got my bracket to bump stop mount. Well, we're just about done. So we went from this concept of having this upper frame bracket with the missing bushing to needing a lower dropped bump stop. So we've purchased these. We figured out what the general compression would be and how much travel I needed, and then that would indicate how much I needed to create for my extension. So we went ahead and I built this extension. It's got the mounting bolts for the frame, mounting plate for the bump stop, and so this now is what we've come up with. Just need to go ahead and clean it, paint it, and then we can go ahead and install it. But there we go, from concept design to fabricate and we're just about done. Well, I am almost done with the bump stop repair replacement. So again, we started off with the frame mount missing the bushing, needed a new bump stop, but also because of the lift we needed an extension. Got these nice polyurethane bump stops, kind of calculated out what the compression would be. Again, not full scientific with figuring out the compression of the polyurethane itself, but just overall with the voids. So then we calculated our actual distance from the leaf spring to the frame, figured out what the compression would be, what my travel needed to be, came up with my distance for my bracket, went ahead and fabricated these brackets to mount to the frame and then mount to the bump stop with that spacer, and this is what we came up with in the end. So I'm going to go ahead and get this second one mounted up and then get both of those on the vehicle. So here we have the new bump stop and spacer. I'm just going to need to go ahead and put it up into the frame mounts there, but you can see I've got my travel that I calculated, and we'll go ahead and get that bolted up and see what it looks like. Alright, so there we have it. There it is, installed on the driver's side, located above the leaf spring bracket. Let's see if we can get a little bit better angle of it, hiding there behind the shocks. But here we've got our new bump stop mounted. Here I got a shot from underneath on the passenger side. So you can see we've got that frame mount, the extension, the bump stop mount, and then now that lines up over the axle pad, the leaf spring pad. So now I'll be able to have a little bit of compression, but also I won't be able to crush anything from underneath. And we talked about this track bar and the drag link having some potential clearance issues, so we just need to make sure that that doesn't have any impact. So there we go. Final install on the bump stops.